Hello again, YouTubers. Welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Board Game Captain.
And I'm Lynn.
And today we're going to be taking you on a new segment we're trying out called Walkies and Talkies about gaming, where we take you on a virtual dog walk with Fenris here, and you have lots of nice scenery to look at here in the park, and we're going to discuss a gaming or gaming-related topic. So today we've decided to discuss the topic of game night etiquette, because it occurred to us recently that there's a lot of new people entering the gaming hobby, and they're not always familiar with the common etiquette and tropes that come along with game night. And it's not their fault, they're just not used to it, they're new to the hobby. And we thought we could use this video as a bit of a helpful tool to give you some insight into already established bits of etiquette that many people hold to on game night. But of course, these may vary per gaming group, and you should always ask the members of your gaming group what is normal for them. But we're going to go over some general ones that are pretty common. So what do you think? What's a good place to start with, Lynn?
I would say if there is snacks provided, to make sure you don't touch the pieces with your grubby hands.
Oh, this is a good one. Also, I'm just going to add to this. Now, bringing snacks is a big part of game night etiquette, and we should probably get into that in a minute because it's a good way to segue. But when you bring snacks, you should definitely try not to bring snacks that are very messy. Things that where you have stuff with the snacks that could get on the components. Things like Cheetos, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's almost no way to eat Cheetos without being messy, and it's going to get on components. So bringing stuff like that, stuff with powder, stuff with grease, anything like that is usually a very bad idea. But just in addition, it's a good idea if you've eaten, if you guys had like dinner before you did playing of the game, that you should clean off your hands before touching the game components. Good morning.
Good morning.
Is he friendly?
Yeah.
Want to say hi, Fenris? Aw. Have a good one. Aw, thank you, Paul. So that is really important, and I agree with you that is definitely an important thing, is to be careful about not bringing snacks that are greasy or powdery, and also not touching the pieces if your hands are dirty, wiping them off first. Which segues into a nice two connected topics, actually. The first connected topic is just generally being respectful of other people's games and game components, because it is in fact someone else's property. They have invested money into it and they'd like it to last a long time. And in addition to that, unlike with classic games where they're kind of a dime a dozen and they just keep printing them, with modern games, most of them are limited runs. And unless the game sold really well, whether it was good or bad, they may not do another run. So you should definitely be very respectful of other people's game pieces. Try not to damage them. One of the things that always makes me cringe is when people claw at cards, use their fingernails to claw at cards on the table. If you're in that sort of situation, you can't seem to pick up the card, slide it off the end of the table, that sort of thing. What do you think on that subject?
Yeah, I know some people fidget a bunch and they tend to bend cards.
Don't do that.
Just be mindful that if that's a tick you have, that you just sort of bend cards when you're mindlessly sitting there. Just trying not to do it if it's not your cards.
And it also, since we were already talking about the food, it helps to talk about the standard game night etiquette of bringing food. So generally speaking, as a rule, when someone hosts a game night, the people who come should bring either food or beverage. And how much food or beverage really depends on what kind of game night it is. I find, anyway, that if it's just a board game night, you should bring some snacks, but not dirty ones. Not ones that are easy to make your hands all messy and make the game messy. And also, or drinks, and when I say drinks, maybe a bit of beer or some soda, but you don't have to go too crazy. But generally speaking, the more effort the person put into making the game night, the more you should bring. So for instance, on a role-playing game night where the game master actually put work into coming up with the story and preparing the night, it's a general rule that in a role-playing game night, the game master does not pay for food. At some point, because it'll be a much longer session, you're going to order a meal, probably pizza or Chinese or something like that, and everybody else should chip in and pay for the game master. Since they already did the work to put everything together, they shouldn't have to pay. So what are your thoughts on that subject?
I agree with that. I don't know if I have anything to add.
Fair enough. So you just agree totally on that one?
Yeah.
So do you have any other good game night etiquette topics to discuss?
No, do you?
Well, I did actually have a thought about talking during game night. So now this is one where some games you're literally not allowed to talk if you're in a certain role. For instance, like Mysterium, where the ghost really isn't allowed to talk. Everybody else can talk to each other, and usually while they're waiting for the ghost to hand out clue cards, people do talk to each other in Mysterium quite a bit, but the ghost isn't allowed to talk, and you really shouldn't talk to the ghost, especially distracting them while they're trying to do their job. And in some games that involve a lot more thought, talking to someone while they're in a bit of a conundrum and really trying to think about it, I mean, everyone's going to do it, but if the person says to you, hey, I need to think, please shush for a little bit, I think it's the respectful thing to do to then be quiet if someone's really deep in thought. On the other hand, there are lighter games where talking is encouraged, things like party games, which I know you're not much of a fan of.
Nope.
But in party games, talking is usually a big part of it, and joking around and having fun, and that's good. But I think it really depends on the game. What are your thoughts on talking during a game?
Well, it depends on the game, like you said. If it's a lighter game, then I don't really mind. But even when it's a longer, heavier game, I usually plan out my turn ahead of time on other people's turns. So, I don't know.
So then it's okay to talk, is
Yeah.
what you're saying. Well, I guess it really comes down to if the person needs concentration, if they ask you to be quiet. But also, if you are going to talk, and this is kind of a big one, and this really, it is dependent on how well you know the people in your gaming group already, but generally speaking, there are certain subjects that you should try to avoid when in a gaming group. So, now, of course, when it comes to vulgarity, that sort of thing really depends on the age range of your group, where your group is meeting up. I mean, if you're meeting in a store, you should try to be respectful of the store and the fact that there could be kids around. But if you're meeting in someone's house and everyone's an adult and no one cares about it, of course, then that sort of thing is fine. I mean, with us, that thing flies a lot. But there are a couple topics that universally, until you know the people in your group really well, universally are generally not good topics to discuss. And generally, they're the same topics you would discuss you would never discuss at work. So things like politics and religion. Because generally speaking, no one is ever able to talk calmly and rationally about politics and religion, so you should probably just avoid them until you know individually where everybody in the group are. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I don't like to talk about either with pretty much anyone, so.
That's fair. It's a bit of a social landmine in general. That's not just for game night. That's a general rule. So, now, of course, you can't always avoid such subjects. I mean, sometimes they're everywhere you look. They're in the news. You overhear someone else talking about them. Especially with politics lately, it's the kind of thing that it's going to pop up. But if it does, and it unintentionally causes an argument to start before the argument gets going, I think it's best, and this is just a general rule for these days, that you should say, whoops, hold on, I'm sorry, we shouldn't have gotten on this topic, let's just go back to the game. Because generally speaking, I mean, everybody's there to have fun and wanting to do a social activity of playing games, and I mean, definitely at that point when someone says, whoops, my bad, I didn't need to start this discussion, don't continue on the fight. Let it go. You can talk about it with them online later or in person later, but in private, if you want to continue talking about it, if you think you can talk about it as adults without fighting and just discussing your ideas, but at the point when someone says, let's let it go, everybody should drop it and get back to the game and pretend it never happened, basically. That would be my opinion on that. What do you think on that subject?
Yeah, I mean, as much as you can just forget that it ever happened, which, you know.
Not really.
Yeah, but you can pretend it didn't happen.
Right. Well, because, I mean, generally speaking, when we're all there for a game night, we want to be welcoming and accepting of everybody as much as we can. I mean, within reason. I mean, you're not going to be accepting of someone who just constantly directly insults everyone and makes everyone feel uncomfortable, but as much as you can, the idea of having a board game night, especially if you're doing it in a public place like a game store or a cafe or a bar, is that you want to be accepting of everyone into the group. So you do just want to like get away from those things that divide us and move on and have a good time. I mean, everyone's there to have a good time, hopefully. Now, another thing, and this is more of a recent topic that comes up, is the electronic medium at the game table, and when it's not part of the game, I mean, of course. So, because there are some modern board games where you need to use a smartphone or something like that, but I'm talking about when someone is explaining the rules, or when it's your turn, and instead of taking your turn or paying attention, you're playing around on your phone. So what do you think on that subject?
Well, I am guilty of doing this.
Yes, you are.
But it's usually not on, it's usually on other people's turns, and where their turns don't really affect my turn, and I also just I'm not really into the game, so I don't care about winning because I just don't want to be playing the game.
Yeah, but in those cases where you're not into the game, you've already agreed to play the game, then you found out you weren't really into the game, you should still see it through. And you should, I mean, that's another thing, is if you're in the middle of playing a game, you shouldn't just bow out or stop caring in the middle of it. If you're not really liking it, you know you'll never play it again, but you got to see it through, because otherwise that's really rude to the other people at the table.
Well, I am seeing it through. It's just while I'm bored, while people are taking 50 million years on their turn, I'm, scrolling in more interesting things on my phone.
And that brings us to the difficulties with analysis paralysis right there, which is a nice segue. Why don't you talk about that? People taking 50 million years on their turn.
Well, I'm a planner. I plan pretty much everything to like a ridiculous degree.
And, like when you're playing Twilight Imperium, your turns are actually pretty quick because you will plan out ahead of time on other people's turns what to do.
Yeah, and sometimes what other people do affects my turn, but I usually have backup plans if things like that happen, because I'm crazy like that.
Now, you're saying because you're crazy like that, but I'm going to say, no, you're being considerate, because planning, as long as the game has some downtime, you should be thinking about first what you're going to do when your turn comes around before you do other things like check your email or your social media or talk to the person next to you, because that way when your turn comes around, your turn will be pretty quick. It'll be much quicker and the game will go much quicker. So the first thing, yeah, it is a considerate thing to think about your next turn during other people's turns before you engage in other activity. I would say that that's kind of important. I mean, it's one thing if you've already thought about it but you haven't come to a conclusion, and everybody gets a turn now and again where they, have to sit and think for a while because they're in a really tough position, and yeah, that happens. But it shouldn't happen every turn. And it really shouldn't happen if you spend all of everyone else's turns chatting with everybody, and then your turn comes around and you go, oh, okay, let me look at the map, and then you take an hour on your turn. That should not happen. Definitely. So, let's see, what are some other, so another big game night etiquette thing that generally happens is usually if there's a new person to the group, and now this one is a bit within reason, if you will, but if there's a new person to the group and they bring a game with them, within reason you should try to play that game. And what I mean about within reason is, first off, if the new person to the group brings like 10 games, you're not going to try to play all 10 games. And also, if the new person to the group brings a game that is universally reviled by everybody else in the group, you're also probably not going to try to play that game. So for instance, if the new person in the group brings Monopoly, okay, all modern gamers despise Monopoly. It's about all we all have in common. So it's the one thing we can all agree on. So if the new person in the group brings Monopoly, you're just going to smile and nod and not play it. Also, if the new person in the group brings like 10 games, you might play one of them. But it's generally a good idea to try to make them feel like they're involved in the decision making of what games to play. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. But also, if they're new to the group, you don't really know what type of games they like.
It's true.
And I don't like party games.
Right.
Especially silly party games.
And for the most part, I agree with you. There are some I like, but the really silly ones, I agree, they can be a bit tedious.
So, if like the new person's favorite genre of game is silly party games,
and all they bring is silly party games,
yeah, I'm going to audibly sigh and roll my eyes, possibly.
Well, again, though, if everybody agrees that they don't want to play the game they brought, that's a different thing entirely. Maybe they've joined up in the wrong group. I mean, our groups tend to be more medium weight to heavyweight games, and our lighter weight games don't tend to be party games for our particular gaming group. Our lighter weight games tend to be more like games like Murder of Crows, for instance, where it's a gamer-like game. It's not really a party game. There's nothing silly involved. So that being said, there is something to be said for finding the right group for you. And also, once you know what your group is into, definitely not trying to bring games that you know your group isn't into and they're not going to want to play. So here's another one. Explaining the game. So now, when everyone comes to a game night, they want to play games. They don't want to spend the whole time punching games and reading rules. Not fun. So if you bring a game to game night and you want to play that game, your game should be punched, and you should have read the rules at least once, so that all you have to do is skim over them real quick and then just teach everyone, not actually read the rules aloud. Because there's no faster way to getting everyone's eyes to glaze over than just reading the rules straight from the book aloud to them. I mean, that's terrible. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. Also, I'm not very good at explaining how to play games, even if it's a game I know how to play very well. So I might also, if you're new to the game group, you might not know, but if it's a game group where you know a lot of people, I mean, most rules you can download PDFs now without having the game. You might want to say like, hey, I want to play this game, but I'm terrible at explaining rules, and ask someone who's better at like being concise to go over the rules. Kind
of like how you do with me, how you have me look over the rules first, because you don't like having to explain rules.
Well, it's not that I don't like it, I'm terrible at it.
Well, you don't like it because you're terrible at it.
I guess.
Okay, that makes sense.
I don't mind trying to explain how a game works, as long as everyone realizes that it's not going to make much sense, because I'm terrible at it.
And another thing to think about is when someone is explaining rules, and this is very much related, but when someone is explaining rules to the game, try to do your best to pay close attention, because the worst thing, and the thing that ticks people off who have to read the rules, and I mean, they've gone to the trouble of reading the rules and now explaining the rules to you, and the thing that upsets them the most, and I can speak from experience because I am probably the person who reads the rules for our group the most, is when you're obviously not paying attention while they're explaining the rules, because you're like on your phone, you're chatting with other people, and then you get to a rule that you clearly explained, and the person goes, oh, you never told me that. Like, when you say you never told me that, the person who read the rules, who definitely told you that, suddenly gets the impulse to dive across the table at you. I can tell you, every time, that image of diving across the table just like enters my mind when somebody goes, oh, you never told me that. So now, do you have anything to add on that? I know you don't usually read and explain rules, so I don't know if you would have anything to add.
No, I don't really have anything.
Do you have any other topics about game night etiquette you'd like to add in?
Maybe don't bring any surprise guests.
See, this is
unless you clear it with the people.
Well, but then it's not a surprise.
Well, yeah, I guess.
So now, okay, so if you're hosting game night at a cafe or a board game pub or board game store, that's fine. You can bring anyone you want. You're in a public setting. But if you're in someone's house, and I think that's what you mean, because we usually host ours at our house. When you host a board game night at your house, you shouldn't just show up with someone that the organizer whose house it is doesn't know without first clearing it with them. After all, it is someone's house, and there's this attitude sometimes people have of, oh, I'm just going to bring my friend with. And that can totally, well, one, it can put the person whose house it is in an uncomfortable situation where they feel like, oh, you know, I can't just tell them they can't come in now, even though I have no idea who this person is. I haven't, you know, but on the other hand, you know, the person who invited this new person did not clear it with them, and they've just now made them feel very, very uncomfortable with someone they don't know. Maybe one thing we should talk about is how to decide what games to play when you're not trying to play a game that somebody brought, because you're being, you know, you're following etiquette and trying to play a game that someone brought in other situations for the rest of the night. So generally speaking, when suggesting a game to play, you should try to avoid games that are going to last the entire length of the game night unless you cleared it with everyone first. So for instance, like, we love the game Twilight Imperium and have so for years, but we don't ever suggest playing Twilight Imperium at a game night unless we specifically said this was going to be a meetup to play Twilight Imperium, because the game will last 6 to 8 hours sometimes, and that's going to be the whole game night. It's going to be the one game. So we don't like to do a bait and switch on people. We're like, hey, come to a game night. People are expecting to play 3 or 4 games, and then we're like, okay, we're going to play Twilight Imperium. So that's one thing. What else do you think about choosing games we should talk about?
Well, I sort of like the loser of the game picks the next game kind of thing. So maybe they might have lost the game because it's not really a game they like, or they're not, you know, good at the mechanics. So it gives them a chance to, you know, have a bit more fun instead of losing every game on game night.
Now that's a good idea, but as with other ways of selecting, like we talked about, it should also be a bit democratic, because you want everyone to be involved. You don't want to pick a game, regardless of who's picking it, and have one person go, I hate that game, I've played it before, it fills me with dread and makes me feel like I'm dying, I don't want to play that game. And then, you know, that one person's going to be left out. Now, it's one thing if you have a big enough game group where people split off and play 2 different games at a time, and then you can just be like, okay, everybody comes over here and we're going to play a party game, and everybody goes over there and you're going to play a worker placement game, and the person like you who really hates party games can go and play a worker placement game, which you love. If you have a big enough group to do that, that's totally cool. But if you don't, you should try to pick a game that everybody can at least participate in and like a little. So, like, I would say go through suggestions and also check with everybody. Be like, okay, is everybody cool with playing that? Like, somebody, like, you suggest, hey, let's play Tales of the Arabian Nights, and then you go around the table and people are like, yeah, I'm not really in the mood for Tales of the Arabian Nights, plus we have 6 people here and that means it's going to take 8 hours. Then maybe move on to something else. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think it's a good idea to try and pick games that everyone has at least a little bit of interest in.
So there you have it. I guess that's about it, unless you have anything to add.
No.
So that's it for our inaugural episode of Walkies and Talkies about gaming. So if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see us do more like it, be sure to give this video a like, share this video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Kaptain, it's Kaptain spelled with a K, on YouTube, and hit that little bell icon on my channel so you get alerts every time I upload a new video. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns on this topic or this video, be sure to put them in the comments down below. And tell us which ones of our things that we think are really important for game night etiquette you agree with or disagree with. And tell us any you think, and this is even more important, tell us what we missed. What kind of things do you think are important to game night etiquette, to making sure that you have a smooth game night? And until next time, game on.